Okay, we are going to start a new project, the project Shulhan Arukh project. We're going to Be'ezrat Hashem start from the beginning of Shulhan Arukh, see how far we can get. We may take some detours as we get close to the Hayyim, go into those sections of Shulhan Arukh, but ideally we're going to stay on the path and see Be'ezrat Hashem if we can in due time, make it through the Shulhan Arukh. The approach that we're going to use in order to make the best use out of our time and maximize our coverage of material is going to be to read the core text of the Shulchan Arukh and Ramah, which are the two central pieces of the Shulchan Arukh. As you can see, a traditional Shulchan Arukh looks like this. You have many commentaries and only a little bit of Shulchan Arukh in the middle. So what we're going to do, though, obviously to read all of these commentaries in the tiny print, as well as all the commentaries in the back, would not be something that would be able to be done quickly or smoothly. So what I plan to do, what I'd like to do, is to read the Shulchan Arukh, and I will highlight for you. I'll take it upon myself to highlight for you what the key commentaries are and what the key views are and interpretations are, so that you walk away with a comprehensive understanding of the halachot, but you don't get overwhelmed and inundated with a lot of reading of a lot of commentaries that will take up the bulk of the time. That way we can probably cover at least one siman, sometimes more, in a session, because we won't have to read every Magen Avraham and every Taz and every Pirchei Tshuva, or here it's Sharei Tshuva, and so on. Or every Puri Megadim. Now, all of these commentaries have something to contribute, but they can also become, long, winding sidebars in relative to the basic conversation. So the first halakha, first section of this is Shulchan Arukh, as we just mentioned in the previous shiur. Shulchan Arukh is divided into four basic sections: Orah, Hayyim, which is the one that we're starting with, which deals with daily life and Shabbat and holidays. Orah, which deals with what could loosely be called ritual laws, kashrut, family purity, and a collection of other laws that don't exactly fit or any of the other sections. It's the hardest one to summarize. Even HaEzer is marital laws, and Chosh and Mishpat is civil laws. So we are dealing with Orah Hayyim, the first volume of Shulchan Arukh, and the Shulchan Arukh is divided into Simanim. Simanim are the names of the sections, okay, and Se'ifim are the names of the individual halachot. So when we say Siman, we're talking about the section that we're in, and when we say Se'if, we're talking about which number halacha we're in within that Siman. Okay, as opposed to let's say when we learn the Rambam, we talk about a perek, a chapter, and a halacha. Here we talk about a siman and a seif. The super commentaries on the Shulchan Arukh are known by what's called seif katan, minor seif. Okay, but we're going to try not to look into too much of the super commentaries, because also not everybody's going to have that in front of them. So let's see what the Shulchan Arukh opens with in the beginning.
Why the difference in the terminology?
Why, I don't know. That's just the way that they decided to. That's just a nomenclature that they adopted. Why, I'm not sure. Even in modern Hebrew legal language, they use seif, and they use a lot of this language. Hilchot hanagat adam baboker. The laws of the practice of a person, or the behavior of a person in the morning. Now, these practices are going to range from things that we would think of as religious to things that we think of as mundane. So that is the general heading. Okay, it's like saying Hilchot Shabbat. It's like saying Hilchot Shechita. Okay, the general heading is the laws of the conduct of a person in the morning, and the first siman is Din Hashkamat Aboker, the laws of waking up in the morning. Uvo Tet Seifim, which contains 9 seifim. So there are going to be 9 individual halachot, more or less, within this one siman. The title of the siman is the law of waking up in the morning, and the seifim will detail that. So let's see what the first halacha is. Now this is an interesting siman because it opens with a moralistic kind of a prescription instead of a real halacha. It says Yitgaber Ka'ari. La'amod baboker la'avodat bor'o. A person should strengthen himself like a lion for the service of his Creator. Shi'ehu me'orer hashachar. He should be the one that wakes up the morning. What does it mean? He should be the one that wakes up the morning.
Wake up before sun.
Right. You should be up before the sun. In other words, you shouldn't stay in bed. They give the example. You shouldn't say in the winter months, it's very cold outside. I want to stay under the covers. I'm so cold. I don't want to get up. And during the summer, when the nights were shorter, remember they lived in a society where you went to bed when it was dark. You got up when it was light. So in the winter, they got more sleep than in the summertime. In the winter, they had let's say 9 hours of sleep, 10 hours of sleep, or more. In the summertime, they had 4 or 5 hours of sleep. It was much shorter, dark period. So you shouldn't say in the summertime, I didn't get enough sleep, I want to stay in bed. You shouldn't say during the wintertime, it's too cold, I don't want to get under my covers. There's always an excuse to stay in bed, right? We're very good at finding excuses to stay in bed. So he says, Yitgaber Kari, you should strengthen yourself like a lion. What does it mean to strengthen yourself like a lion? So the Taz says, this means against the Yetzer Hara, because the Yetzer Hara is going to try to bring you down. And you need to strengthen yourself and be able to push for that not to happen. Waking up the dawn is a very interesting idea, that metaphor of waking up the dawn. And the Taz has also, again, the two key commentaries, by the way, in Orah Hayyim. Every section of the Shulhan Arukh has its signature commentaries. In Orah Hayyim, the two main players on either side of the Shulhan Arukh are the Magen Avraham, who you'll hear quoted all the time. Magen Avraham. Always the Ashkenazim are very big fans of the Magen Avraham. It's very, very commonly quoted. The Taz is also commonly quoted. The Taz has the distinction of being one of the few commentaries that appears in every volume of Shulhan Arukh. He's in Orah Hayyim, he's in Yoreh De'ah, he's in Even HaEzer, and he's in Choshen Mishpat. He's in all of them. He plays a particularly big role in Orah Hayyim and in Yoreh De'ah, and a lesser role in the other two sections. The Magen Avraham only wrote a commentary on Orah Hayyim. So in Yoreh De'ah you have somebody called the Shach, Ziftei Kohen, who's called the Shach. In Even HaEzer you have two totally different commentaries, Bet Shmuel and Chelkat Mechokek, and in Choshen Mishpat you have the Shach again and the Sma, a commentary called the Sma. So there are always the two commentaries along the side of the Shulchan Aruch, and then you have like Be'er Hetev, which summarizes the commentaries. You have Sharei Teshuvah or Pirchei Teshuvah, which summarizes responsa literature on that Siman, and you have the commentary of the Gra, the Vilna Gaon. You have the commentary of Rabbi Akiva Eger. You have Levushei Srad and Yad Ephraim. You have all of these different commentaries, and you have Peri Megadim. Peri Megadim is a commentary, a super commentary on commentary. So the Taz and the Magen Avraham make comments, and the Peri Megadim for each comment writes a paragraph of commentary on their comment. So you understand what I mean by unwieldy amount of commentary here. Okay, the Peri Megadim is also considered very important. He's very useful and helpful in understanding the Taz and in understanding the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. He's very helpful, when their words are unclear. So in any case, the Taz says something very interesting. He says that there are two. That generally a person will wake himself up. There's an energy that comes from us, in other words, that we have, and there's an energy that Hashem brings. Okay? And that the actual language of the Torah, the original language of the Shulchan Aruch is summarizing here is, I wake up the morning, and the morning doesn't wake me up. That's the highest level. What that means is I have so much internal energy moving me, I don't even need Hashem to intervene and help me, because I'm so ablaze with energy in the morning. I get up in the morning and I pop out of bed and I'm ready to go. That's ideal. But for most of us, at the very least, we should be up and ready for that divine assistance to get us going, which is manifest in the form of a cup of coffee most of the time, the divine intervention. Okay? But really, seriously, we have to do our part, and Hashem will help us to make it to the finish line. That's what the Taz says. And then Hashem will fill in the blanks in terms of giving us the energy to be able to meet the challenges that come to get in our way. Now, the Ramah here, this is one of the most fascinating comments of the Ramah. The Ramah is Rabbi Moshe Isserles. He is the Polish rabbi, the Ashkenazi rabbi, who wrote his own Shulchan Aruch, basically, or planned to write his own Shulchan Aruch, and ended up summarizing it as notes on the Bet Yosef's Shulchan Aruch. Like we mentioned in the previous shore, this is a flashback. So what did the Ramah write? He writes as follows: Ve'al kol panim lo ye'acher zeman ha'tefillah she'hatzibur mitpalelin. First he says, at the very least, okay, I understand, you're not going to be a lion in the morning. Okay, maybe you don't have that level of energy, but don't be so late that you miss tefillah. The very least, the minimum is you get up in time for tefillah. So, true, you might not be able to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and wake up the morning, as it were, but you should at least be able to make it to tefillah. He says that's the minimum. And then, and this is the really remarkable one, haga'ah. I'll tell you, you won't know why this is remarkable until you get to the end. He says, Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. I place Hashem before me always. This is the Ramah speaking it has it there in like different, instead of in bold letters, it has it in regular letters. In the Shulhan Arukh, usually it's in Rashi script, okay? Instead of in regular letters, usually in Rashi script, as it is here. So he quotes the verse, I place Hashem before me always. Hu klal gadol b'Torah. It's the general principle of the Torah. Uvema'alot tzadikim, and in the excellence of the righteous people, shalolachim lefnei Elohim, who walk before God. Ki en yeshivat adam utnuotav va'asakav v'hu levado beveto. Ki yeshivato utnuotav va'asakav v'hu lefnei melech gadol. Because the way a person sits and moves and deals with life in his home is not the same as the way a person sits and moves and deals with things in front of a great king. Right, you're on your best behavior when you're in front of a great king. In the privacy of your own home, you let loose. You know, you could be like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We don't know.
Is it like you have to get up in the morning? Is it very dangerous not to jump out? You have to sit down.
Yeah, the Masechet Gittin, right? Masechet Gittin says you should wake up and then pause a little bit before you jump out of bed.
Yeah,
that's true.
Get dizzy. If a person is very dizzy,
right.
Get up.
That is true. Actually, Masechet Gittin says that, and actually the Mefarshim here do bring that you shouldn't literally jump out of bed the moment that you open your eyes. A person needs a few moments to acclimate themselves first before they hop out of bed. That is indeed true. That is correct. Don't
lions like yawn when they wake up?
I've never watched, but it's quite possible. But the idea here is that a person who has Hashem in their mind all the time can't behave the same way as a person who...
Lions sleep 20 hours a day, so why are we...
maybe that's not... We're only focusing on the lion at the moment that he's mitkaber. The rest of the time we don't want to imitate. Lions also sit there and do nothing while their wives go and do all the work.
Except the fish,
which most of the time wouldn't work for human beings.
Except the fish are only 24 hours. They're not they're asleep.
Yeah. So the lion sits there, and the lioness is the one that goes and hunts, and then he takes the food. That's why they call him the king of the beasts, right? So anyway, most people it doesn't work that way. So velo diburo v'harchavat piv kirtzono. And similarly, your opening of your mouth and what you would say in when you're with your family is not the same as what you would say with a great king. Certainly when a person places in their mind that Hashem, the Holy One, blessed be He, the whole world is filled with His glory, is standing over him and seeing what he does. It says, will the person hide in a hiding place and I'm not going to see him? Can you escape from Hashem? Of course not. So, you're going to feel fear and humility. You're going to have a fear of God and be embarrassed in front of Him always. And where does this come from? Moreh Nevuchim. So the Moreh Nevuchim of a Rambam, the controversial work, makes it into the first halakha of the Shulhan Arukh. It's a remarkable thing. You think of the Moreh Nevuchim as this philosophical, esoteric, this esoteric philosophical work that, nobody learns the Moreh Nevuchim. It's the first seif of the Shulhan Arukh. He mentions it. It's unbelievable. It's really remarkable. But anyway, the Ramah was a student of philosophy, incidentally. It's not that surprising that the Ramah put it, because the Ramah was a student of philosophy. And actually there's another famous Acharon by the name of Maharshal, that they had correspondence over philosophy versus Kabbalah, what was the best way, what should a person study, should a person study it at all, and all that. So the Ramah was a big advocate of some secular studies and philosophy and things like that. He was into that. So he quotes from the Moreh Nevuchim. A person should not be embarrassed in front of those who make fun of him in his service of Hashem. And Rabbi Abadi used to say that these guys the Muslim will take their prayer rug out and roll it out in the middle of the street and start praying, but a Jew will hide, to pray. They don't want anybody to see them. But other people of other religions, they're not afraid. They roll out right in the middle of the street. So why should we be afraid? Also, when he's walking humbly and when he lies down in his bed, he should know before whom he's lying down. As soon as he wakes up from his sleep, he should wake up with alacrity, with zeal for the service of Hashem. So the first halakha of the Shulhan Arukh is literally from the beginning of your life. Remember, the Shulhan Arukh is supposed to be a guide for life. It's a practical work. It's a manual. Shulhan Arukh is a manual. And so what is it going to begin with? Logically, it's going to begin with the beginning of your day, the first moment that you're awake, and tell you what should the first thing in your mind be when you wake up in the morning. I'm created to serve God. I'm standing at attention and ready to serve Hashem. That's the first thing that should be on a person's mind when they wake up. Now, we turn to Seif Bet. Seif Bet says, and this is talking about even before the morning. Hamashkim leitchanen lifnei bor'o. A person who wants to get up and cry out before Hashem. Leitchanen means to say tachanunim, to say supplications before God. Yechaven l'sha'ot shemishtanot ha'mishmarot. They should seek the times that the mishmarot, that the heavenly watches, change. She'en b'shlish halayla, which is a third of the night. U'v'sof shnei shlish halayla, and at the end of 2/3 of the night, which we would call the middle of the night, right? And u'lesof halayla, and at the end of the night. Okay, so if you divide the night into 3 parts, so you have the first third, the second third, and the third. U'lesof halayla. Okay, shatfilah shitpolel b'otan hasha'ot al ha'churban v'al ha'galut v'tzuya. Because so you have the first third, 2/3 in, and the end of the night, and so each point is considered an auspicious time for tefillah. So if you go, so this is similar to the idea of tikkun chatzot, not exactly, but what it means is that these are times, the Gemara says in Masechet Berachot, that were particularly considered to be significant times for tefillah. In general, any time where there's an astronomical change is considered to be a significant time for tefillah, because in some way a person is feeling connected to something greater than themselves. So that's why, for example, Hanetzach Hama is the best time to pray Shacharit, really when the sun rises, because you're connected to something greater. It's not just you praying, but the whole world is coming to life, so to speak, at that moment. You feel connected to something greater. And really the best time to pray Mincha is Im Dimdume Chama, what it's called in the Gemara, with the setting of the sun. However, it says Layet Ale Abaye, that Abaye cursed the person who prayed with the setting of the sun. What's the reason why? Because he's going to miss sunset and he's going to end up praying after sunset, and we don't want that. So therefore, generally, one is ill-advised or advised against praying right at the moment of sunset. But ideally, in theory, it would be a good time. Why? Because it's a time where there's astronomical change and you feel a connection. The whole purpose of tefillah is to feel a connection to something greater than yourself, to put yourself in perspective, to see yourself as part of something grander. And so it's easier to do at the times when the world itself is going through a change. So if there are 3 mishmarot, these mishmarot would seem to, based on the Gemara, correspond to certain astronomical, we have a hard time comprehending it in terms of metaphysical change, because metaphysical change isn't something we can wrap our heads around. But if we understand the idea of the mishmarot as having some astronomical, corresponding to something astronomical, then we can say that there are motions going on in the sky at night because of the motion of the earth, obviously, not because of the motion of the stars, and that somehow it corresponds to these changes, that we want to align our tefillot with those moments that we have a feeling of connection to greater things happening in the world around us than just the words coming out of our mouths, because oftentimes we're isolated. That's why there's halacha. Really, most Batei Knesset don't follow this, but really, ideally, there should be windows in a Beit Knesset that you can see, so that you don't feel like we're in our own little bubble when we're praying. You feel that you're connected. When we get to Hilchot Beit Knesset, you're going to see what the Shulhan Arukh says, but that's the ideal. but at least to have windows, so that, the Rambam even mentions having window, because that way you feel connected to the world around you when you pray.
Aren't we supposed to not believe in auspicious times, though?
That's why I'm explaining it to you specifically in a way that you can avoid that problem.
Oh, in that way it's okay?
I'm not saying that the auspicious times are bad when you believe that there's something mystical about the time, and this is a lucky time, this is an unlucky time in some arbitrary way. But what I'm saying is that because there's some kind of thing happening out there mechanically in the world, that you're timing your tefillah with that moment because it's a more powerful moment. It's actually more powerful. It's a more inspirational moment to you, right? Exactly, because you know that you're aligned with something even greater than yourself. Like when you go and do Birkat HaChama once every 28 years, you feel like, wow, there's something happening here, and we're connected to it. That's why it's such a powerful moment. Not because it's an auspicious time in some kind of a superstitious way, but because our tefillot we're uplifted in our tefillah when we feel that, just like a minyan can uplift your tefillah because you're part of a nation praying, you're not just part of one person praying alone. So all of these things are more powerful for your tefillah. So that's what it says. Now, next is Gimel. Ra'oi lechol yirei shamayim shehem metzer v'doeg al chorban bet hamikdash. It's a general principle. These are all general principles of Avodat Hashem. That it's proper for a person, and of course it's very timely to be reading this the day after Tisha B'Av, it's proper for a person to be concerned and to be worried about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. In other words, just like one should always feel that they're in the presence of God, one should also feel the absence, the seeming disappearance or hiddenness of Hashem's presence in our life. That we don't have the Beit HaMikdash.
Are you talking about the Tikkun Chatzot?
It's not talking about that yet. Not specifically. I mean, it alluded to that in the previous part when it said that a person should time their tefillah with certain, the Mekubalim say. Now, the Magen Avraham actually goes into it, that the way the Shulhan Arukh has it, the 2/3 of the night is not midnight. That's not really Tikkun Chatzot. But the Mekubalim follow. There are two answers in the Gemara about how many mishmarot there are at night. One says 3, in which case the second third would not be a Chatzot. One says 4, in which case the second quarter would be Chatzot. And it says that's what the Mekubalim who made Tikkun Chatzot, they were looking for that. They were following that answer. There are two versions in the Gemara. They were following the version that there are 4 mishmarot, and therefore they came up with Tikkun Chatzot.
So okay? Today
that's what we're talking about. Right? I'm not sure, I didn't check. No, something like that.
Yes.
Right. So that's, he's saying that's a time where it's particularly inspiring to pray. And then he says that a person should be doeg al chorban beit hamikdash. Now the Gemara, the Shulchan Arukh doesn't explicitly make this connection, but the Gemara says that at each one of these mishmarot there is a remembrance of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, that Hashem, so to speak, remembers the Beit HaMikdash and the absence and the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and so by timing our tefillah with that, we're also connecting to that idea. And again, I think that it also says that whenever the Jews get together and they say Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach, Hashem says, "Oy li that I destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, how terrible it is." What does it mean? Did Hashem forget? He needs a reminder? No. It means that every time something happens where the Beit HaMikdash, the absence of the Beit HaMikdash is felt. So the Mishmarot, obviously the Kohanim would shift in their watches around the Beit HaMikdash throughout the night. And so at each one of these watches, there's a remembrance that the Beit HaMikdash is not there. Because there was always a guard. There was always a guard detail at the Beit HaMikdash. Not because they were needed to protect it, but because it was a sign of kavod. And the same is true when you would say Yehei Shmei Rabbah. Whenever the tzibur is praising God, you realize, wow, we're praising God here with hundreds of people, but imagine the Beit HaMikdash. Imagine what we're missing. So whenever that happens, there's a moment of reflection on the absence of the Beit HaMikdash. And the same thing is true at each one of these times. Halakha Dalet, Seif Dalet. Tov me'at tachanunim bekavana. Me'harbot belo kavana. A principle that so many people forget. It's better to have fewer prayers with more kavana than to have a lot without kavana. So what's better, but a lot with kavanah or a little with kavanah? So that, he doesn't talk about that case,
okay.
Right? He doesn't talk about that.
The Rambam says if you don't have a kavanah, you have to go back to.
That's a different type of kavanah. A different type of kavanah. Here we're not talking. We're not talking about amidah here. We're not talking about amidah here.
No,
what is this?
Here it's just he's making not a specific reference to the liturgy, like Shemona Esrei. He's making a general observation about any prayers that you do, whether it's mizmorim, let's say reading Tehillim, let's say reading Techinot of various types.
What does kavanah mean?
understanding the words and focusing on what you mean. Focusing on what you mean. In other words, not reading by rote. A person will say, "Oh, it's Shabbat. They came a little bit late. They want to catch up in Psukei de Zimra. I know what I'll do. I'll speed read. All of the Mizmori. That's not the right way to do it. Pick the key ones and say them in a way that you can understand what you're saying, and you actually have an experience from the tefillah. Otherwise, you're just doing a rote. You're imagining that somehow Hashem is very happy that you are lip servicing a lot of words that you're not thinking about. I mean, that's not the way that works. So the Taz says here something very interesting. He says that a person can sometimes extend their tefillah l'shem shamayim, and a person can sometimes. He says that kavanah here has a dual meaning. Kavanah can also mean why are you doing it? Because a person can be marbeh. He can increase his tefillah shelo bekavanah, meaning not with the intent of serving God, but let's say with the intent of, I know that I have to go to class after this prayer, so I'd really like to be late to my first class, so I'm going to say a very long shacharit. And I'll come in and say, I'm a very holy man, I'm sorry that I was late, because I don't like my first period in school. Or a person wants everyone to see how pious they are, so they they go very slow. Whatever the reason, but they can do it shelo l'shem shamayim. A person can be mitzamtzem, do a short tefillah l'shem shamayim. Why? Because let's say they want to go learn Torah, or they have other mitzvot to do, so they are doing it me'at bekavana, meaning that they're doing less, but they're doing it for a mitzvah. They're doing it for a good purpose. They're doing it because they want to go learn Torah. They want to do something else of great significance. Okay, so that's sometimes a person can extend it without the right reason. Sometimes a person can shorten their tefillah, and actually in the shortening of tefillah, because they're going to visit a sick person, or because they're going to help an elderly person, or because they're going to learn Torah, or whatever the reason might be, they're shortening their tefillah for a good reason. So it's not just, there's more than one meaning to it. In other words, one is that it's better to emphasize quality over quantity when it comes to tefillah. It's also sometimes justified to say less tefillah for a higher purpose, because you have to go do a mitzvah that's very important.
Does it mention anything about how many hours of sleep would like 7 hours sleep or 6 hours sleep that we have a kavanah for the tefillah? In Yalkut Yosef, he talks about the number of hours of sleep, and the Achronim do bring the issue of the number of hours of sleep. So there's a pasuk. There's a pasuk in the Achronim on the bottom in the Sharei Tshuva, I'm trying to find it here. The Machatzit Shekel. Some of the Mefarshim talk about this number of hours of sleeping. Okay, and they learn out how many numbers of hours of sleep you should have from pasuk in Eov. Pasuk in Eov says, "Az yanuachli, v'shachalti az yanuachli." That I'm gonna be. He's actually talking about death, which is a little morbid, but he says, I'll lie down, I'll go to sleep, Az yanuachli, then I'll have rest, because he's lamenting his fate. Az, the gematria is 8. So Az yanuachli, 8 hours will make you rest. Right, so that's what the Sefer Eov, that's what they learned it from.
Health doesn't kill you.
Right, so now they're saying not. So that's generally the medical advice. Even the Yalkut Yosef says 6 to 8 hours. The Ben Ish Chai actually says, the doctor said 6 to 8 hours is the best. And I think that's still the advice, although now they're saying 8 hours might be too much.
Doesn't Rambam say that?
Rambam says 6 hours, I think. Right? Or just
7.
Or is it 7? Okay.
7.
But it's all around the same number. It's all around the same number. So there was a story about somebody who slept 4 hours a night, and they asked him, how can you sleep 4 hours a night? It says Az yanuachli. It says it's supposed to be 8 hours. He says Az yanuachli li. Okay, he said that the what?
For a 40-year-old or something.
Right. It's talking about over 2. It's talking about over 2 days. It's not talking about over. It's saying that 48 out of the 48 hours, 8 of them should be sleeping. Right. So therefore, that means 4 hours a night. But that's tough. That's not a lot of sleep. Okay. Anyway, Tov Lomar. So now he says in Seif Hey, Tov Lomar Parashat Akedah, Parashat Man, Vaseret Diberot, Parashat Orah, Mincha, Ushlamim, V'chatat Vesha. You're saying all of Sefer Vayikra if you say this, okay? Or Parashat Vayikra, the entire thing every morning. So he says it's good to say Parashat Akedah. Now, does he say you have to say it? No, he says it's good to say it. It's good to say Parashat Akedah. Mention read the Akedah.
read the Parshat Haman, which we don't have in the beginning of Berachot. We have Akedah. And Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments. Uparashat Olah, the section that describes the Korban Olah in the beginning of Vayikra. Mincha, the flour offering. Ushlamim, the peace offering. And Chatat, the sin offering. And the Asham, the guilt offering. Okay? Now all of these things, if you look in an Ashkenazi Siddur, they have all of them. They have all of them in the beginning of the Ashkenazi Siddur. We don't have all of them in our Siddur, but the Ashkenazim have actually like all of these korbanot in there, and I guess some people must say them. We have the Akedah, that's for sure. The Akedah, it's interesting that it's mentioned in all of the Achronim bring that saying the Akedah and saying all of these things is only good if you understand what you're saying.
Are you talking
and they give a
about
couple. No, the Akedah, the actual Parashat Akedah. Yeah, the Parashat Akedah. So what's the reason? Why is it important? So there are two reasons given for reading it. One is to remember Zechut Avot, remember the merit of Abraham Avinu. The other reason is to remember the Mesirut Nefesh. In other words, that you should give of yourself. You should be as devoted to Avodat Hashem as Abraham was, willing to sacrifice anything you have for the service of God, like Abraham Avinu was. So one is more of a metaphysical reason. In other words, it's remembering Zechut Avot, remembering our the merits of the forefathers. The other one is more of a practical, ethical reason that you should you should look at the example of Abraham Avinu in self-sacrifice. So the reason for reading the Parashat Haman is actually, it's brought in the Yerushalmi, I believe, that reading the Parashat Haman every day is a segula for parnasa. It's actually brought. It's not something. There's a lot of segulot that are brought that don't have any source. But it actually says reading the Parashat Haman. Why? Because a person recognizes that their parnasa comes from Hashem. It elevates them. In other words, they recognize their parnasa comes from Hashem. It's not a magical formula. Again, you have to really understand it and take it to heart. So it's like it says that if you say the Ashrei 3 times a day, you're definitely going to have Olam Haba. So according to that, we should tell, the biggest Rasha in the world. We'll tell, I don't want to mention any Rashaim that I could think of. Some really bad guy to say Ashrei 3 times a day. Jimmy Carter. Okay, we'll tell him to say Ashrei 3 times a day, he's going to get Olam Haba. Right? No, it has to be with actual kavanah. It has to be with actual understanding what you're saying and meaning it. When you say Ashrei, it doesn't mean just reciting the words. That's what they say. I'm not making that up. It's actually what the Mefarshim say. They say that this should all be done with an understanding. And we read the Olah, the Mincha.
That's right, the Tibbut is not bad anyway.
Right, so that's an interesting thing. So actually, the Gemara talks about how initially, Aseret HaDibrot was part of the Kriyat Shema. It was part of the Berchot Kriyat Shema. Because actually, when we say, we don't realize it, we'll notice it, pay attention in this week's parasha. When we say in the first paragraph of the Shema, והיו הדברים האלה אשר הולכים בצווך היום על לבביך, והיו הדברים האלה is the Aseret HaDibrot, right? So they put into the blessings of the Shema Aseret HaDibrot. It made sense, but the only problem was that the early Christians said, oh look, even the Jews think that only the 10 commandments are what's important. Because look, they put it in the prayer every day, only those 10 commandments. What about the rest of the commandments? So obviously, what we teach, the early Christian belief that only the 10 commandments are important, even the Jews are acknowledging it. So they took out the Aseret HaDibrot and they said, and that's what the Rama adds here, Haga'ah, V'davka biyachid, mutar l'omar Aseret HaDibrot b'chol yom. Only an individual is allowed to say the Aseret HaDibrot every day. Aval asur la'omram b'tzibur. And that's from the Tshuva of the Rashba. You can't have a communal reading of the Aseret HaDibrot for the same reason that you can't have it as part of the Shema, because it lends credence to the idea that the only divinely revealed part of the Torah is the Aseret HaDibrot, which many early Christians and maybe even some Jews, subscribe to that idea. So we don't want to give any credence to that idea. Why do you say the other korbanot? So obviously one of the reasons that you say the other korbanot is because uneshalem afarim sifatenu, that tefillah is in the place of korbanot. What is our avodah today? What is our service of God today? We don't have a physical service of God like they had in the times of the Beit HaMikdash. We have tefillah. So we study the parashiot of korbanot in order to connect our tefillah to the idea of korbanot, that it's in place of the korbanot. The Mishnah Brura says it's even better for a person to actually study these in the morning, to actually take some time to study a little bit about the korbanot each day, would have an even greater significance than to just read them every day. Now, these are all korbanot, incidentally. Olah, shlamim, mincha, these are korbanot that can be brought voluntarily, as what's called nidava. You don't have to be obligated to bring an olah, shilamim, or mincha. However, chatat and asham, you have to be obligated to bring those korbanot. So there's a whole discussion in the Achronim whether it's legitimate to say, Hashem, please accept my reading of this chatat as if I offered a chatat. Because if you're not obligated to offer a chatat, you can't. Or asham, you can't. Now we're saved from all of this because we're not Ashkenazim and we don't have this in our Siddur at all.
Because we sin every day. So
Right. No, it would have to be a certain. In order to bring a chatat, you have to have a very specific format, namely that you have to know something is asur. For instance, what's the classic case of a korban chatat? You know that you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat, but you forgot it was Shabbat, and you cooked, and then you realized it was Shabbat. Or you knew that it was Shabbat, but you didn't realize that cooking is not allowed on Shabbat. You didn't get up to that chapter yet, so you went and you did it. Or and you made a mistake. You knew it was Shabbat, but you forgot. Actually, it has to be forgot. It can't be that you didn't know. You forgot.
You didn't know the act you're doing.
Right, at the moment you didn't know. That's totally different.
Oh,
That's different. If you didn't know the act you're doing is cooking, it's a totally different thing. Yeah, so the real formula is it has to be that you had knowledge and you forgot at that moment. Okay, but you didn't forget, but specifically that you knew that on Shabbat you're not allowed to cook, but you forgot it was Shabbat for a moment and you did it. Or you knew that it was Shabbat, but you forgot you weren't allowed to cook on Shabbat for a moment, and that you had a lapse of awareness. So what you really bring, I don't want to get into Hilchot Korbanot here, but what you really bring a Korban for is the shgaga, the mistake, not the action so much, because you could do the same action in a complete, not realizing what you're doing, complete oblivion, and completely oblivious to what you're doing, and you wouldn't have to bring Korban. It's not the action; it's actually the shgaga, the mistake that you made. So there's a whole discussion about that. We don't really have to deal with it so much because we don't have these in our Siddur at all. We do say the Akedah for those who can, and we do say.
I have a question. After, let's say, when I come to shul late, okay, and I didn't make it to the korbanot, can I finish the tefillah and go back to the
You can say them afterwards. It doesn't have to be before.
According to the Mikbalim, they don't go.
Right, I know that. Right. I'm not I'm not a Mikubam, so I can't speak to you from the Kabbalistic perspective. I can only tell you what the halacha is. You could.
I feel like
if you want Kabbalistic,
I'm not talking about the Kabbalistic. According to
Shulhan Arukh doesn't distinguish.
You could go back and you could
for sure. That's a Kabbalistic thing, but everything has to be in order because each stage is a certain metaphysical corresponds to a metaphysical thing. But that's Kabbalah. If you're a Mikubal, you should follow that. Like what I always say is like if you're Mikubal and everything, you should follow the Kabbalistic minhagim. But if you're not, you don't have to.
He was also into Kabbalah also.
But he doesn't put much of it in the Shulchan Aruch.
You don't put it in
Not much.
Okay.
Yeah. Parashiot HaKorbanot Yomar Lo Yomar Ela Bayom. So since we're viewing this reading or studying of the Korbanot as if we brought the Korban, and it says Biyom Tzavotot Bnei Yisrael that Korbanot have to be brought during the day, so therefore the reading of these Korbanot should also be during the day. So meaning if you get up very, very early in the morning, you got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, for whatever reason, sometimes people will say the brachot first, and then they maybe will go to synagogue later, because let's say they had to get up early for something, or they're going to pray later, they shouldn't say the korbanot before daytime. Should say after he reads the Korban Olah, may this be accepted as if I brought an Olah. He should say the same thing after the Mincha and after the Shilamim, because these are Korbanot that can come bin dava. They can come voluntarily. There's actually, very interestingly, and somewhat unrelated to this, a machloket, ironically, between the Rambam and the Tur. The Tur doesn't usually talk about Korbanot, but there's actually a machloket whether you can bring an Asham as a nidava. And Asham Talui specifically, because let's say a person isn't sure if they did a sin. There were 2 pieces of meat on the table. One of them was chelev, that you're not allowed to eat. One of them was not. And he ate one of them and doesn't know whether he ate the non-kosher one or not. So the halacha is, he has to bring what's called Asham Talui, a doubtful Asham, because he doesn't know. He might have eaten chelev, he might not. So there are some who say, an Asham Talui, you don't have to actually have done a sin to bring an Asham Talui, because maybe you didn't do a sin. So you should be able to bring an Asham Talui even as a Nidava. So that's one opinion. It's like a Nidava. But if you bring it L'Shem Asham,
So you're saying it's for an Asham. So there's a machloket in the Gemara. Can you bring an Asham Talui saying, I don't know if I sinned or not. I just want to bring an Asham Talui every day. So it talks about a Tana that every day brought an Asham Talui because he said, maybe I did a sin, I don't know. I'll bring one every day. But then it's a machloket. So the Rambam holds you can't do that. Why? So it's a very interesting question because Asham Talui, by definition, you don't know that you did a sin. So one could argue
you did something that might be a sin.
Right, might be. So the argument is like this. You could argue, you see from this that you don't have to have done a sin to bring an Asham Taloi. So then I could bring one every day, right? Or you could argue that being in a state of safek is necessary.
Yeah.
In other words, being in the state of safek is the problem. That's why you're bringing the Asham Taloi. It's a mechayev. It's not a nidava. You're not giving it because even though you didn't do a sin. You're doing it because you have a safek, but you can't just say have a safek every day. You don't really have a safek every day. That maybe you ate a piece of non-kosher rachel. So the Rambam and the Tur argue about this. So that it's actually relevant to Hilchot Shechita in a totally unrelated context. But that if a person slaughters, if you slaughter, like say a cow, lishem olah or something like that, because you're being a smart aleck, it's a big problem. It will make it's no good. It can posel the shechita, but only if you say l'shem something that you could actually bring as a nidava. So there's a whole argument about the asham there, because maybe you could bring an asham as a nidava, maybe you can't. Anyway, that's another story. But the Shulhan Arukh rules no, you cannot. So therefore, if you said l'shem asham, it's a joke. You're not serious, so it's okay. Yomarim hakorbanot pasuk v'shachatoto al yerach hamizbech tzafon lefnei Hashem. This is a pasuk. You should slaughter it on the edge of the Mizbeach to the north before Hashem. This is a pasuk that we actually generally find in our Siddur after the Akedah. Okay, and it's brought in the Midrash that this is to remind us of the Akedah, because the Korbanot Tamid, it says in the Midrash that after the Akedah, Hashem said, I'm going to have Korbanot Tamid every day to remember the Akedah. So there's a connection to the Akedah in the daily Korbanot, and this pasuk again reminds us of that. Yesh noagin lamar. Now I found this really remarkable. Yesh noagin lamar. There are some people who have the custom to say Parashat Kior, which we don't say. That's the parasha that talks about the sink that they put in to wash the hands and feet of the Kohanim. Ve'achar kach Parashat Tirumat Hadeshen, the removal of the ashes from the previous day. Ve'achar kach Parashat Tamid. Then the Parashat Tamid, the daily Korban. Ve'achar kach Parashat Mizbach Miktar Ketoret. And then the description of the making of the Mizbeach. And then Uparashat Samanei Ketoret V'Asiyato. And then the last one he mentions is the parasha about the different ingredients of the Ketoret and the preparation of the Ketoret. And that we do, and that's like a big deal. So I always thought it was so interesting that the two things that we seem to place the greatest emphasis on, which are the Korban Tamid and the Ketoret, especially a big emphasis is placed on the Ketoret. And these are the two things that says some people have the custom to say them as if it's a side point, and those are the only two things. And in fact, the last one on the list is the one that's made the biggest deal out of. The reason why it's made a big deal is because the Zohar talks about the recitation of the Ketoret as being a very, very significant and auspicious recitation based on Sod, not based on Shulhan Arukh. Shulhan Arukh, yes, was a Mikubal, but didn't incorporate much Kabbalah into Shulhan Arukh. So he doesn't mention any of these Kabbalistic ideas. Maybe from a perspective of Kabbalah it would be very important. But the Shulchan Arukh, you'll see that many of the things he mentions, which is very interesting, are not even in the Sephardic Siddur.
Is that minhag?
The Olah, the Mincha, the Asham, all these things are minhag. All these things are minhag. So if you look at the old Siddurim, let's say like the old Persian Siddurim, right? In the beginning of the Tefillah it has Ketoret, but at the end it says Yesh Noagim Lamar Ketoret. Right? It doesn't say, and also in the Spanish Portuguese it says Yesh Noagim Lamar Ketoret at the end. Why do you have to say Ketoret 2 times? Well, that's based on the Kabbalah that says you should say Ketoret 3 times a day, twice in the morning, once in the afternoon, like Ashrei. But it's Kabbalah. So based on, it's interesting though that even the things that the Shulchan Arukh mentions should be done or are praiseworthy to be done don't appear in the Sephardic Siddur. Like all of the different korbanot that he mentions, the Olah, the Asham, the Olah, the Mincha, the Shilamim, the Parashat Haman. We don't find these in the Sephardic Siddur. The Aseret HaDibrot, we don't find them. He just says Tov Lomar. It's good to say them, and they didn't make it in. Because in the end, Kabbalah had a great influence over what made it into the final copy of the Siddur.
And many of these things were not in the Arizal was not a proponent of the recitation of many of these things. So that's the main reason.
Ashkenazi.
I know, but he also had a very, very significant influence over the Sephardic Sidur. So because Arizal was not especially a proponent of saying these things, they did not get included in the Sephardic Sidur. The things that he placed an emphasis on, or that Kabbalah placed an emphasis on and embraced, are the ones that you find mentioned.
So the Rambam Sidur looks significantly different than...
The Rambam doesn't have many of these things at all. All of these Korbanot components are not in the Rambam Sidur at all. But, yes.
Doesn't the Gemara bring down, they originally wanted to...
Yeah, he has Seder Tefillah.
To include Parshat Balak, but they said we don't want to burden the...
Right, it's too much.
But now
it's for Yetziat Mitzrayim.
Another 50 things. So.
I know. If you read all of these Korbanot, it would literally take you probably 45 minutes.
So they just picked that one to be the burdensome one?
All of these things are good things. When he says Tov, it's good to say something. That means, listen, if you're a person who does Midat Chasidut and you want to go out of your way, you have extra time, you have a lot of kavanah. Look, we have a lot of extra things that are added into our tefillah. We have, Patach Eliyahu. Many people say, there's a lot of extra things. So it's all Tov Lamar. These are things that are considered positive to say. They're not considered things that are required. Nothing here did he say it's required to say. He says it's good to say it. Some say it. He didn't say any of these things are necessary.
Could have made that one Tov Lamar also.
Which one?
The Balak one.
Right. I mean, and Aser Tadibrot they actually took out. They wanted to put Parashat Balak instead of the third Parashat Tzitzit. That's what they wanted to put it, because they wanted to mention El Motzei Mitzrayim. They wanted to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim in a way that they thought would be a very powerful way through the Nivuot or the Brachot of Bilam. They didn't put it in because it was too long. So since they didn't need it, because they have the Yetziat Mitzrayim is mentioned at the end of the Shema. They didn't need it. Kadeshli, the Shulhan Arukh mentions when in Hilchot Tefillin.
Could you add it if you wanted to?
What? Any of these things he says Tov Lamar, it's good to say, you're allowed to put them in, you can say them if you find meaning in it. But I think that the principle that he said before is also important, which is if you overburden yourself with saying too many things, it's going to be hard to get for quality to prevail over quantity. So that's the one concern. I do have another